Hello everyone. So today in this video, we're going to see how to set up a survival or emergency shelter in desert areas, or at least in areas where we expect high temperatures. So this is one of the types of shelters that we learn to set up during commando training courses. You'll see that there are still some basic principles to follow, even though there can be many variations of these shelters, which are meant for desert areas. Today, I'm on a small 24-hour bivouac. Tomorrow we're expecting a temperature peak of 41-42 degrees. In the shade, of course, so the conditions are going to be a little tough for walking. So now I have 2.5 hours to reach the area I've scouted. So to be comfortable, I took a light setup, a light backpack, about 10 kilograms, a little less than 10 kilograms. So right now, I'm still in a shaded area, but a bit later, I'll really be out in the open. For this bivouac, I took my basic gear, more or less the same as what I showed in another video, but I added 2 or 3 extra items for building the shelter to keep things at a reasonable, manageable level. I took out all the food in the stove. On the other hand, I took a water filter pump, which will be useful to me in this hot weather. So I'll be on site around 6 o'clock or late afternoon, which will allow me to start building the shelter. So it's common to come across pools of stagnant water in areas like this. So you have to be very careful because most of the time it's going to be stagnant and often toxic. So it often contains viruses. So you will absolutely have to use purification tablets, or better yet, even boil it. So today I'm going to filter it and add tablets to make sure it's safe to drink. Of course, you can cool off with it, no problem, even though it doesn't smell great. But if we're lucky enough to have it near the shelter, we can also cool down the shelter. We'll see about that a little later. So this is a ceramic pump. So it's ceramics that can be cleaned. So it's very interesting. They never get clogged. When you pump water, as a general rule, take it from about 20 centimeters below the surface of the water. At the surface, you have a lot of pollen, debris, small floating things, and if you go too deep, you often have more turbidity. So generally, we take 20 centimeters. On this pump, it's quite convenient because you can adjust the float. So after pumping, I have water that doesn't smell stagnant at all anymore, which is already pretty good. I'm still going to put in a purification tablet, and then I'll wait a good hour for it to take effect. Well, it's pretty warm, so it won't be fresh water. I'm taking advantage of this little break to give you some information about these shelters. So as I remember, there were a few rocks. In the end, there are no stones, almost no stones. There are a few a bit further away, but really very few. So I switched to a classic desert shelter made only with sand. I make this shelter about 1 meter wide and 3 meters long. And we'll see later with the tarp how I'll set it up in. As for the orientation, the entrance, the opening of the shelter will be here, and we always place it facing the prevailing wind. If the prevailing winds aren't too strong, if they're really strong, there are ways to make this type of shelter completely buried, at least anyway at ground level. Here I'm only going to dig about 45 to 50 centimeters. That should be enough because the winds are weak, but it's still interesting for overall cooling. And then for orientation. So here we're still on the Atlantic coast. So we can consider that the general wind patterns here are from the west-northwest. So I made a personal assessment, and it's true that there's a bit of wind coming from the west. You have to be careful in these areas because there are a lot of obstacles, since there are quite a few forests here. So you have thermal winds most likely, with rotating winds very possible. So it may be that the shelter, compared to a bit later in the evening, isn't very well positioned in terms of ventilation. Well, with these shelters, it's always possible to change the setup a little and ventilate a bit better, depending on the situation and depending on the winds. So for the depth of the pit, it should be at least 50 centimeters to get a bit of coolness. And with a slight slope at this level so you can get in and out. Before setting up the tarps properly, I'm going to set up the tarp. Here, I have the 3x3 tarp. It's the most versatile. I'm going to remove the stakes that were there just to mark things out a bit. We've definitely got 3 meters in length. So, this first tarp is going to serve to protect me from ultraviolet rays. Now I'm going to set up the 2 emergency blankets, basic emergency blankets, which will help me deal with the heat tomorrow. So these ones will be set up this way, lengthwise at this level. So the second layer that was made here is very interesting. It can also be done with a second tarp or a light colored tarp or a white canvas. And in any case, it's best to avoid dark colors as much as possible for the top layer. So now I feel really refreshed. So there's quite a bit of wind tonight, maybe even a little too much for these surgical covers, which are very light. The tarp, though, is fine. It would hold up well. If ever there's too much wind, if it picks up, if it's a gusty wind, I'll have to move some sand here to make a little barrier and have a bit less wind. In any case, it'll be nice and cool. And especially for tomorrow, the night should be trouble-free. So of course, when you have shaded areas, you build your shelter in the shade, but here we're really making a desert-type shelter. You should know that you'll also have to dig the shelter at night, in the evening, or in the morning. Here, I'm doing it at the end of the day so I can take advantage of the light for the video. In deserts, where you have high temperatures during the day and cold temperatures at night, you'll need to build the shelter away from rocks. And that way, you'll benefit from the shade it gives you during the day, and you'll stay sheltered during the day. At night, you can move closer to the rocks that will store heat and release it during the night. So depending on the area we're in, we're not going to use it the same way. Then you should know that generally we will. Normally set up these shelters on a slope that's well exposed to the wind so you get the proper cooling. Avoid hilltops, which are often much too windy. It will tear the fabric off your shelter and it will be completely uncomfortable. For comfort inside the shelter, I have a poncho liner. It allows me to be insulated from the ground and to spend the night normally in the best comfort possible. There's no need for a blanket here because it will be more than warm enough. However, if tomorrow it's very, very hot inside the shelter, then it's possible to put the poncho liner on the tarp, between the tarp and the survival blankets. You should know that the poncho liner is made of two thin nylon fabrics with polyester padding in between. So it's very, very thermally insulating. So you can put it between the two, and it really gives you very, very good insulation inside the shelter during the day. So if you're near a water source, you can also sprinkle it from time to time and put it in the same place. So with evaporation, you'll get a cooling effect and some relief. So for starlight now, or snap light, like here, I always use red. So there are several reasons. If you use the snap light for an emergency situation, you want to be spotted. So red is the universally recognized color for danger or emergency. If you use it as ambient light in your shelter, like here for example, red will be much more discreet. You should know that a diffused red light is much less visible than a white light, for example. Then the third reason is that your eyes will also adapt well when moving from red light to darkness. So, is this what we're going to have on all the bridges of ships around the world? Especially for reading maps, so a little detail as well. You should know that everything that will be, if you light yourself with a red light, anything that's printed in red on your map or on your documents, you won't be able to read it, or you'll have a very, very hard time reading it. So these are rated for 12 hours. So, well, they do get weaker after a while. So the night was good. The temperatures in the shelter dropped to 21 or 22 degrees, so it was very comfortable. This morning I had to pay attention to the emergency blankets again because they had come a bit loose. There was quite a bit of wind. So we can possibly remove them during the night since they're there to fight against the temperature and the heat from the sun. So there's no problem with that. The main thing is to have them during the day and to have ventilation like this during the day. That should be perfect. So we'll be able to measure the temperature difference when the sun is strong, at noon or at 2 o'clock. It's starting to heat up now. We're going to use the cooling technique with a bit of water. I'm going to put it on the cheche. So I spread it out as much as possible, and then I can add a bit more water. So here, you can't really see it well. It's already come loose. It's starting to act up. The thermometer is completely off in terms of humidity. Here it's at 51.4. It came loose earlier. It was at 53, 54, and then it drops. So about half an hour ago, I was over 50 outside. Now it's more or less stabilized. At 25, just a little bit below with a lot more humidity and really high up. So I have a temperature difference of at least 25 degrees, at least compared to outside. There you go. The bivouac is now over, so thank you for staying until the end. Feel free to like, and I'll see you next time for a future video.